We don't come into the world with banners on our foreheads basically saying, I'm your sister, be nice to me, and let's not have sex. Where does this information come from? One of the routes to the evolution of altruism is through tracking who shares genes in common. We actually have systems that motivate us to care for other people based on how likely they might be related. And the question then is, how do we make that inference?
Dr. Debra Lieberman is an evolutionary psychologist focusing on morals, kinship, and incest.
What about an only child or same-sex siblings? Do they view incest differently?
I mean, do either of you have brothers and sisters?
I have two brothers, so the thought of that is like instantly gross to me, where Simon only has a brother.
If you've lived with someone from the first day of your birth, that predicts the level of sexual aversion.
Disgust was once used to protect us from disease. Can you talk us through that emotion from an evolutionary point of view?
Disgust is an interesting emotion.
Just before we get into today's episode, we have a favor to ask you, and that is, can you please hit that subscribe button? It's somewhere there on the screen for you. It's very easy, and it means so much to us as creators.
This allows us to keep raising the bar on the guests that we bring you guys every week and build our community even bigger. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into today's episode.
Debra, let's start off with morals. Do you think modern society gives us too much access to moral outrage?
It does seem to be on every street corner these days, doesn't it? I think that we're in new times. I mean, this is certainly not the savannah. We're not hunter-gatherers anymore in an environment that our mind evolved to be in. And so I think that the modern world gives us a lot of reasons to get morally outraged by a lot of things, by a lot of people, and by a lot of things.
And what is that doing to our mind when we're, if pieces of social, you wake up in the morning, we go for a scroll on TikTok or Instagram for 30 minutes, and we go to work with all of this outrage. What is that? What's that doing to us?
I don't know that we're going to work with all of this outrage. I mean, did you come to work today outraged about anything?
What did I see? I saw a Donald Trump video, but it was an AI Donald Trump video. So yes, I did come to work with a little bit of...
Yeah, I feel like because we're flooded with consistent emotions now, right? So, and it does impact your day because that is what you're consuming consistently. So whether or not you see something happy or something that makes you angry, I guess it can impact your day.
No, it certainly can. So let me back up maybe a little bit. So as an evolutionary psychologist, I am very interested in the kinds of mental apps that evolved to guide behavior. And so we have on our shoulders an incredible information processor. And the question is, what are the algorithms that evolved to guide human behavior? And evolutionary psychologists start by thinking about ancestral environments and the kinds of problems we had to solve, because likely we have some circuits that allowed us to navigate and solve those problems, at least under ancestral conditions. And so when it comes to moral outrage, so that's jumping quite a couple of steps ahead. But you can ask, are there any particular kinds of systems that would have evolved that allow us to live in groups and get along in groups? And that's kind of where the whole aspect of morality comes in. So it's mentally and physically coordinating with other people, forming coalitions for the purpose of for pursuing a common goal. And so moral outrage typically comes because, a whole group of people have gotten into a lather about a particular condition that they want to change, or a particular group that they like to eliminate, or what have you. But it's always typically in a given, group's interest in order to get everyone all whipped up into a lather. But the question evolutionary psychologists start with is, what are the design of some of these social features, these behaviors, and how are they designed to work in ancestral times? What was their function? And then what's going on today? Are they still being deployed in the same way? is there a mismatch between modern environments and our kind of ancestral brains? And so that's kind of where we start.
So then what changes have you seen? Are we still using these ancient moral instincts?
Moral instincts. So again, that's a huge topic area, right? So there's, where to begin? So moral instincts. We have a lot of instincts about the kinds of behaviors we want people to be engaging in and not. And so when we form relationships with people, for instance, we have we're invested in them treating us well. So if you bop me over the head, start insulting me, I'm going to get angry and I'm going to want to change your behavior. Or if I am low leveraged, I might get depressed if I can't exit the relationship in any type of easy way. So there's very interesting kind of emotional strategies that evolve to deal with interpersonal relationships of one kind or another. And so kind of morality, lowercase m morality, you can think of as a radar that keeps track of fairness and equality and treatment towards oneself, right? So how are you treating me, my friends, my family, and so forth. And so that type of morality in terms of monitoring how other people are having direct effects on me is one kind of aspect of morality that a lot of researchers have talked about. But then the question arises, fine, there's our behavior and our interactions. And if you bop me over the head, I'm going to say that's wrong. And, you harmed me and that's unfair. And you should apologize and take me to the hospital or something, right? So you should be a good human.
Yeah.
And so that's interactions that, between you and someone else. The really weird question to start thinking about is, that's fine and dandy, but why do we care about what other people are doing? So, why do we care what people over yonder on the other side of the hill are doing? Why do we care what they eat? Why do we care who they mate with? Why do we care, pretty much anything that they do? And so that's kind of the uppercase morality of, why do we care about third-party interactions, people that we'll never interact with again? Where does this sense come from? And so that's a very different question.
Do animals have the same sense? Do they worry about another animal on the other side of the hill, or is that just a human thing?
I think there are some animals that do worry about the others on the other side of the hill. So chimps. So Richard Wrangham, Jane Goodall, they had studied chimps and also another researcher, Michael Wilson. They really were very interested in the coalitional behavior and aggression of chimps. And chimps, what they will do is they'll form patrol parties and they will lap their borders. And, you might think of, they're just kind of patrolling their borders to keep everyone safe and defending anyone against any intruders and so forth, walking the wall. But in fact, what they're doing is they're also keeping track of and listening for non-group members that might be very close to the perimeter of their own territory. And when they find an individual who is maybe alone, and so depends on how many you're with, right? So if you're walking with two of your buddies and you come across a lone male, well, that ratio is pretty good, right? So, 3 males can pick off 1 male. Sorry, I tend to talk in these really crude ways. So I don't mean to, I'm not endorsing anything. I'm just talking about the kinds of behaviors, but the systems would have been geared to kind of err on the side of there's a good chance of success given that there's 3 of us and 1 of them. And so these awesome playback studies were done showing that 3 males, if you play back an outside male's pant grunts or some type of sound of a non-coalitional member from a neighboring coalition, and there's just 1 male kind of being played over this audio on this audio tape, 3 males patrolling will rush towards and try to identify and narrow in and close the distance to this 1 male, presumably to kind of take him out. And so, but they won't approach if there's 5 males, right? So they kind of have a good understanding of their leverage, kind of these military ratios. And so the idea is that males are patrolling their boundaries and picking off other males and other coalitions of males that they can do, that they can pick off in a cost-effective manner before they can form more high-leverage groups to pick them off, right? So it's a get them before they get us sort of mentality. And it's all to protect the resources that the territory holds, whether it be food or females. And so other primates kind of have this. So I don't want to call it a moral sense because people get bugged, but they certainly do have a sense of a coalitional aggression about the things that seem to be natural, that they are naturally motivated to engage in to protect one's own territory. And so the question then becomes, is this what human morality is? And most people would say, no, absolutely not. You're crazy. And so I say, okay, fine, I'm crazy. But let me have the, continue on with the crazy thought, which is, I don't know, we do seem to mentally and physically coordinate and target lower leveraged groups for the purpose of marginalizing them and taking their stuff. So I don't know. I'd have to have someone argue against that and have a counterexample for some reason. But that's so if you want to call that morality, then the answer, Simon, I'd say yes, they do. But to the extent, but I don't think we want to go there. I think people like to hold that term as uniquely a human concept. But do chimps and other animals have social value for other individuals and other groups? Yes. Do they treat other individuals and other groups based on how highly they socially value that individual or group? Yes. Does that start to get at some of the beginning elements of what our moral foundations are based on? I think so.
Interesting that you said how people view morals, because you instinctively think, okay, my morals are either good or bad, right? Like when I'm thinking about morality in general. Do you think that our moral instincts are designed to help individuals be good?
How do you define good?
That's so true. Yeah, because what I think is good, you're right, you might not. So I guess it comes back to the group that you hang out with, or
I had
a
pretty good narcissistic ex. I'm pretty sure we have different definitions of good.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, that's so true. How does moral certainty affect our ability to listen and compromise and perhaps change our minds?
This is a good question. Not an area that I'm an expert in, so I can just give you my thoughts and kind of where I come from, and at least just as a person, and also as an evolutionary psychologist who thinks about these things. So I've thought about this in terms of how I would change people's behaviors. If I'm part of a coalition that has a certain set of norms and beliefs, regardless of what those beliefs are, to violate them and to go against my group is dangerous in some respect, right? So now I'm disagreeing with a majority and I can now be targeted. And I think that humans are incredibly sensitive to the kinds of behaviors, actions that we can engage in that are going to land us in hot water, that we're going to get punished for, that people are going to call us out on, or anything, right? So I think we're incredibly sensitive to that. Emotions like shame, are easily triggered even if you've not done anything wrong, but if people start to value you less for whatever reason. And so being socially targeted is something we're very sensitive about, and we try to skirt, having that happen. And so that said, if we are sensitive to what other people think and we're concerned about saying anything that other people can latch onto to identify us as a minority to then target and eliminate and exploit, I think that conformity tends to be the rule. So people in a group will tend to conform, regardless of whatever beliefs or concepts exist within that group, and especially regardless of what those beliefs and concepts look like to outsiders. So, I mean, for instance, there are some religions that for a modern Western woman with all the freedoms in the world seem to suppress female freedoms, female sexuality, and so forth. And I remember, growing up being really upset by this and wondering, like, what if you just told them, like, look, on the other side of the fence, there's, this life that you could be having that's freedom and choice. And I soon, or maybe not soon, but recently, after thinking about morality and writing this book, Objection, with a colleague of mine, a legal scholar, and thinking about this in a little bit more depth, it really became clear to me that just like I have certain beliefs and that I wouldn't shake them, and some might be wrong objectively, that because it would put me on the outs with my group, it would cause me to stand out and therefore be someone who could be called out or exploited or punished for some reason. And there's very little at stake in me doing that in my current setup. Imagine now being in a situation where if you disagreed even slightly, you wore just slightly the wrong thing, or, like the fear that kind of prevents you from acting in any other way. And so there's a comfort level, I think, in kind of belonging to a group and sticking with one's own. So I think that, I've already lost track of your question, but that's the idea of, I'm sure that'll happen in this conversation.
It leads us to, it leads us to judgment.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't think it's possible to change, what people are. It's not easy to change what people think. And I think that respecting that different coalitions have different thoughts. I mean, in the States, oh my God. I mean, like, we're very far from respecting that in terms of, conservatives and liberals. Each side thinks the other is, on drugs or, completely crazy on a variety of topics. But yet each one is going to adhere to that because the dangers of disagreeing with one's own coalition could cause, major problems.
When we are judging someone, can you tell us what's going on? How's our mind working when we're judging someone? It could be like, I mean, with what you were talking about before, if you go against, I guess, the tribe and you do something that goes, they're going to put you in a position where you're going to be judged. I guess that judgment, what's going on in the mind of the person that's doing the judging?
Of the person that's doing the judging. Well, let me ask you this. So just to kind of gain some entry into this topic, because this is an interesting topic to be sure. Who are the people who tend to call out other people, right? So there does seem to be, does everyone rush to judgment and post on social media? Are there certain types of people who tend to do this? And so, I mean, I can't imagine that really shy people who are, socially timid, very, very protective, and, very introverted. These are not the people who I think are calling other people out, right? So the mousy types who are very kind of timid, who are in the corner, wallflowers kind of things. And I think people who, so bullies are people who feel leveraged, that feel that they can get people mentally and physically coordinated against someone. So, you talk about, who is likely to lead one of these moral projects, really, and go after someone or attempt to target. There's potentially a lot to be gained these days, right? I started that movement, right? So you can, and movements tend to, attract money. So there's good reason why some people might be motivated to be quick to call out to judgment, to start, a shaming tirade.
But let's move on to something that you study immensely, which is kinship and incest avoidance. How do we know who our close genetic relatives are, and why is this so important?
Well, good. I'm glad we can transition, although we can get back to morality because it lends right back into it. So one of the questions I started out in my career being very interested in is, how is it that we know who our close genetic relatives are? We don't come into the world with banners on our foreheads,
Yeah.
basically saying, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, I'm your sister, be nice to me, and, let's not have sex. And where does this information come from? And it's hardly uniquely human. And so other animals are capable of identifying their close genetic relatives as well. You might think initially, well, you're just told, right? That's your sister. But it ends up language. There's a lot of problems with language.
Yeah.
So first off, linguistic terms they don't necessarily map onto genetic boundaries. So we have sororities and fraternities, and in religious systems, you have fathers and mothers and sons. And so the names of just linguistic labels don't necessarily map onto actual genetic boundaries. And so why would it have been important to obey those genetic boundaries, or at least understand what they are and make good inferences about them? And there's at least two good reasons. First off, it's who to be nice to. So one of the routes to the evolution of altruism is through tracking who shares genes in common, or who is likely to share the gene for altruism in common. But individuals who share a recent common ancestor, close genetic relatives, they tend to have an increased probability of sharing the same genes. And so we actually have systems that motivate us to care for other people based on our perception of how likely they might be related. And the question then is, how do we make that inference? How are we coming to that conclusion? And my research shows that we rely on cues that were present ancestrally. So today we can take a DNA test, right? And so I can match our DNA and I can determine, yeah, we're sisters. Oh my God. In fact, Sonia, maybe you and I are actually sisters. There's a chance.
Yeah.
One never knows, right? So, and so you have, there's that strange possibility, but how do you know? And so in ancestral environments, one of the cues that we would have been able to rely on that someone is a sibling would have been seeing your mother caring, like pregnant, birthing, nursing, carrying around an infant, right? So to the extent that you accurately tag and categorize the right woman as mom, which wouldn't have been hard. So mom, offspring, that's the easiest relationship, right? So females know who their babies are. It falls right out of them, right? So kinship is very certain. And young offspring know who their mothers are, because that's typically the female who breastfed them, who nursed them. And so before formula, before modern times where you can just go to the store and anyone could feed a child, typically ancestrally, the woman who was caring for you and nursing for you on demand was your mother. And so one of the ways that children in a family can identify possible younger siblings is seeing, well, who is my mom caring for as an infant and breastfeeding and so forth. And so that's one way. Another way, it leaves open the question of, how does that younger infant, though, coming into the world, figure out who's an older sibling? Because younger kids weren't around to see their older kids born and breastfeeding and cared for as infants. So my research has found, and it's perhaps more accurate to say, it confirmed a prior hypothesis called the Westermark hypothesis, that longer periods of childhood co-residence duration are the cue that the mind uses to figure out who's a close genetic relative. If you've lived with someone from the first day of your birth, on, and you are observing your parents care for them, feed for them, tend to them when they're sick, yell at them, teach them, and so forth, chances are those children have a greater probability of being an older, biological sibling than other kids that they're not caring for in exactly that same manner or to the same extent. And so the mind seems to have different ways of figuring out who's an older sibling and who's a younger sibling.
What about an only child or like same-sex siblings? Do they view incest differently?
So I would say that in terms of the development of sexual aversions, the sexual aversions that develop tend to be targeted towards the sex of interest, right? So for brother and sister, so if both are heterosexual, you'll find that to the extent that both are raised together and exposed to the kinship cues, that they'll both develop pretty intense sexual aversions. I mean, do either of you have brothers and sisters? Do you?
I have 2 brothers, so the thought of that is like instantly gross to me. Like I'm like retract, like it's so off. Where Simon only has a brother, so I don't know. What's it like for you?
Well, I don't have any kind of.
Yeah, you wouldn't know. It's like it's like an instant reaction almost when you do have a
Simon's like, cool.
opposite
What's
sex
that
sibling.
about?
Yeah. I mean, we know it's wrong, right? But then I guess you can also go back to look at all the TV shows. Like White Lotus just recently had I think the latest season of White Lotus was like an incest storyline with 2 brothers. And then obviously one of the most famous, Game of Thrones. So when we watch that stuff, it doesn't feel as wrong, but we know it's wrong. Is there any science to that?
I mean, so there's a lot in what you just said and a lot of fun stuff. So let me first start off with so aversions. So part of my research found that for individuals who have one opposite sex sibling, you can ask about, how long did you live with them? If you're older, did you see them as a young kid being cared for by your mom? And that really predicts so the length of time. So if they're older and they saw their, younger sibling being cared for by their mom, typically there's a lot of altruism directed toward, that sibling and a really strong sexual aversion, right? So the mind is like, yeah, you're definitely a sibling. Saw you being breastfed by my mom, like sibling 100%. And so, but if it's an older sibling, the longer you lived with that sibling from your birth, then that kind of ratchets up, more and more certainty with each year and so forth. And then that kind of predicts the level of sexual aversion and also altruism, I should say, that you direct towards that older sibling. And so that's for the individual sibling. And then you can ask, well, okay, does a family composition, how many opposite sex siblings you're exposed to, does that influence like how morally wrong you find this third party incest, other people engaging in sex with siblings? And so it ends up it does. So what I found is with my co-authors, my advisors, is that the more kind of years of co-residence you have, the more exposure to the more kinship cues with opposite sex siblings, the stronger your moral opposition to sibling incest in general. So So Simon, I'm with you. I don't have any opposite sex siblings, and that's why I can do this research, and this is why I can talk about this stuff. Because I'm pretty sure if I did have, and none of my co-authors had opposite sex siblings for that matter, as well. Because I'm pretty sure people with opposite sex siblings who get grossed out would be like, why would I ever want to research that? Like, why do I want to spend my days like, totally grossed out? And so yes. So what's interesting about that is, well, I don't know if, sure, I'll tell you a funny little story. It's just about one subject, and it's anonymous, so it doesn't matter. But I was really interested in whether the composition of one's family affected your response to a variety of different types of disgusting acts. Some typical, like, putting your hand in an unflushed toilet or eating something, but also kind of sibling incest kinds of acts. And I remember I would present to subjects acts on a screen that they would just need to imagine. So a word came up, like imagine eating your favorite dessert. That would be one of the good ones. But in the meantime, they were told that they may or may not be videotaped while they were doing this. And all I did is, it was back before all this digital stuff. And so I had videotapes of people's faces with time codes on it. And then I had videotapes of the screen that they were looking at, separate tapes with what acts were coming up. And I would just code the time code. When did this act come on? When did it go off? When did it come on? When did it go off? And then I did things, for the faces, for just the facial videotapes, I would code them in terms of what muscles were moving. Different muscles are involved in producing different facial expressions of emotion. So when you smile, your the corners of your lips raise, and if it's a genuine smile, your eyes will kind of, the muscles around your eyes will tighten up as well. For disgust, it's, it's the nose wrinkle and the upper lip raise. And so what we can do is you can go and record all of these different muscle movements by looking really slowly through videotapes. I was matching the videotapes up, and I was matching up what facial expression of emotion I was seeing in a subject with the now act on the screen. And like I said, there were positive ones, and then there were things like imagine, tongue kissing your sister and other kinds of acts. And there were also, imagine tongue kissing your mate or going out with your mate and something like this. So there was always a positive and a negative one. And I remember looking at one of the videotapes, and I'm matching it up, and I'm seeing this guy go like this. To the act of, kissing your sister. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what is going on here? And so I remember like quickly rushing through and being like, please don't have any siblings, please don't have any siblings. And it ends up, you didn't have any sisters. And so your question, Simon, I think is probably very, very typical in the sense of you don't have this aversion activated, right? So it's like, I'm told it's wrong. And so I don't have any natural aversion, but if I met someone and I was told she was my sister, she knocked on my door, she's my sister, but she's really cute. I wouldn't have a natural aversion that would have developed over time due to this system in my brain that's looking for these cues. But I now know, I have knowledge of it. So, maybe, I'm attracted to her but maybe we won't have babies. And so if you think what I'm saying is odd, it's not, because you have kids who have met each other, who share the same father, for instance, through sperm banks, right? So they get together and they really enjoy each other's company. And it's interesting. People have said, well, maybe they find each other attractive. And so the question people were asking is there something underlying like Freud, and are people really sexually attracted to their relatives? No. By virtue of siblings sharing similar genes, they share similar preferences, right? Similar proclivities. And so it's like, you like to get up at 4 a.m. and, garden. Oh my God, I do too. I like Kung Fu movies. You like Kung Fu movies. You like spicy food. I like spicy food. Like, siblings are just more likely to line up on all the little quirky things. It's almost like if you were to design your best friend or design a perfect mate, you would design them to have a lot of overlapping features. And this is what siblings tend to have. It's just normally there's an aversion there, but now you've got someone who pretty much shares all of your kind of common quirks and gets you and so forth. And so my point is this: these kids meet as adults and there's no aversion that's there, right? So the question that I would then have is, and it's not for me to answer, is it wrong for them to start a relationship? Is it wrong for them? I mean, so the question then becomes, what is the definition of wrong? Why do we call things wrong? Yeah. Wrong seems to be the kind of thing we use when we want to go after people. And so things that disgust some, is that a reason to go after people? I pose the question. I'm not going to answer it. But that is a question I'm interested in.
Do you know if is incest porn more popular than what we think?
That's one area I would not know. Why don't you tell me? Do you think incest porn is more?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, I guess it's a category, right? So it exists.
And like I mentioned before, there's a lot of shows that have it, and it doesn't. When you're watching those things, I guess because they're actors, your brain just doesn't have that disgust reaction so frequently as to if you did know the person.
Yes, I think there's that. I think that, so you talked about Game of Thrones. And so I remember, I mean, that was funny. Although you also had the brother and sister, right? So, so that was.
Well, and then, White Lotus was a storyline with two brothers. So one brother was gay and the older brother didn't know that the younger brother was gay, and then they had an encounter in the show. Spoiler if you haven't seen it, but they have an encounter in the show, and the older brother has these flashbacks and instant disgust. The younger brother doesn't, because obviously he feels a certain way towards his brother. But when you watch it,
So here's what
why are we okay with that?
I'm going to hazard a hypothesis here on this one. So here, coming into this literature, human behavior isn't random, right? And so men, women, hetero, homo, whatever variety of sexuality you are, for the most part, we all have sexual aversions to something, right? So these develop. I would hazard a guess that, so I haven't studied it as much because the numbers in my surveys have always been much lower. So collecting information and data on people who are hetero it's always a little bit more difficult. But I would suggest that individuals who are gay, so lesbians, gay men, that when they grow up with a same-sex sibling, and there might even be some research that I apologize if I am overlooking it right now, that if they are exposed to the same kinship cues, they will develop very similar sexual aversions. This system is very, so it is an ancient system, this kinship system, and it's an ancient sexual aversion system. This isn't an easy system to, this system has been debugged, I guess I want to say, software-wise, over the long haul. It's not like some of these other social relational kinds of systems that we find a lot of mutations in. We have autism and schizophrenia and things that are kind of increase the friction in social interactions, and that those come from more relatively recent psychological adaptations. Kinship's really ancient. Not that there can't be any disruption to it. Of course there can. Not that there can't be any disruption to disgust and those circuitries. Of course there can. But I would hedge my bets to say, gay men, lesbians growing up with same-sex individuals, they find them disgusting. Right. So now the question is, okay, let's bring it into art. and now artistic kind of license to do whatever one wants to do. Right. So I don't know. You'd need to know, the story about this is coming from what kind of psychology, what kind of human. Right. So it really does, the teller matters for the tale. And so I can't quite say anything. But here's what I will say. When norms in a culture are strict enough, so you might wonder, well, there are certain cases where you do have brother and sister, or things happening. Cultural norms can actually cause, so getting back to morality, can cause people to internalize particular types of behaviors that they might find disgusting, but they will engage in because of the cost of otherwise, not doing it. And so there is a cultural, so one of the natural experiments that was, that allowed people to kind of examine incest aversions and kinship systems occurred in the Taiwanese minor marriages long ago. And so in Taiwan, Japanese colonial government held Taiwan, and so they took meticulous records. And at the time on the island, there were a variety of forms of marriage. And so the two, for this purpose, there's one called minor marriage, where it's an arranged marriage, where a young girl just born is adopted into her future husband's family and raised alongside him until the day when the parents are like, now you will wed. That is your, that is your bridal suite. Go enjoy kind of thing. And then the major form of marriage, where it's a typically arranged marriage where husband and wife don't meet until they are adults. So as you can imagine, so Arthur Wolf was a Stanford anthropologist, and he went through some of these archives and he asked the question, do you see differences between these major marriages where there is no childhood association and minor marriages where there is? And he found that as the Westermarck hypothesis predicts, and as this kind of kinship cue of co-residence predicts, you find that kids who were raised together, obviously they didn't ask them how disgusting do you find each other, but you can infer it based on the fact that they had fewer kids, they had higher rates of divorce, and greater rates of extramarital affairs, if you can believe it. They also documented that, as compared to the major marriages where the individuals met as teenagers. So all to say this, when norms exist that can cause you, that would cause you to kind of bear the brunt of your group, be punished, exploited, excommunicated, whatever it is, people will engage in sex and marry people who feel like brother and sister. And many of them, they did marry and they did produce offspring. So all to say is that for money, so there's a lot of money to be made on the internet, I'm told. So the idea that people will do anything and say anything. And, on the Game of Thrones, it's like, they're not my relatives. They're gorgeous people.
Totally,
And
yeah.
it was, I'll watch, but and so I know it's fake. And so, in any case.
Debra, you wrote a great paper on emotional tears. Why should we view tears as communication, not just expression?
So it's a really good question. What are tears? What is this water falling from our eyes? So I'm the editor of a journal, Evolution in Human Behavior. And there was an author submitted a paper about tears, and it was quite a while ago, but the topic of the paper had something to do about being able to more easily recognize facial expressions when tears were present, when water was present. And at the time, I had a separate set of colleagues. So as an editor, you kind of get a good lay of the field as to who's doing what. But another group of colleagues was working out this concept of social value. So why it is I value you, when you should value me, what happens if you don't value me as highly as I think you should, that leads to anger, or if you value me potentially higher than I expected you to, that's gratitude. But a bunch of folks were kind of interested in this idea of how social value is really this glue that keeps the relationships working. And so this paper on tears came in, and I was thinking to myself, about, when I cry, what's happening? Like, why do I cry? And then so, and I was wondering whether or not crying was, even though this is not what the paper you're talking about, which I'll tell you in a second, but I was wondering whether when I cried about a relationship or something, it was a kind of a data dump. It was the way that my body was ratcheting down the social value of a person that had revealed that either they didn't care, or I no longer cared, or whatever. And so I just was wondering if crying was associated with ratcheting down what the perceived value another person holds for you. That aside, it led me to think about, hey, no one's ever written really about the evolutionary functions of tears from an adaptationist point of view. Like, there's programming in there and it triggers tears. And so with the colleagues in the paper, we decided to kind of start to lay down some of the theoretical frameworks for what tears might be. And so it goes something like this, which is, so tears are the amplitude of emotion, because tears, people would say, oh, you cry when you're sad. Yes, but not always. I mean, and not exclusively. So we cry when we are angry. At least women also are prone to do that. We can cry when we are so grateful. You can cry when you're in love, in joy. And so there's a lot of reasons why we cry. And so I started to think about it as an amplitude. Just like yelling and screaming, we can yell when we're mad, we can yell when we're happy and we're grateful, in love, and so forth. That crying seems to be very different, a different type of amplitude communication. And then when you think about who cries, it's usually comical when you see a really, really big muscular guy crying, right? Usually there's some type of comedy going on there. And it's usually also very comical or unexpected when you see the smaller person get their way and be more formidable, and everyone kind of bow to their wishes. And so it looks like when you start thinking about these boundary conditions and what's odd and what's not odd, that crying, it seems to be a way to communicate to someone else. For instance, it's communicating value. And in situations where someone is imposing harm on you, you're saying, hey, you're imposing a cost on me that you might want to start, stop. To the extent you value me, I want to let you know, like, this is imposing costs. And it's usually done by the person with the lower leverage, the lower leverage in the relationship. Because if I had high leverage and you were imposing a cost, I'd be like, hey, what's going on? And I'd be all formidable and all like, alpha and bop you over the head and say, don't do that again. You got me? And so, but if you're lower leverage and you don't have the ability to wield, physical formidability in order to get your way, another strategy is tears. Like, don't stop hurting. You're hurting me. And so it's the lower leveraged individual's way of manipulation. I mean, it's all manipulation in some sense, but I don't want people to think that they're going around manipulating intentionally other people. It's just that we are always trying to get other people to value us in a variety of ways. And evolution designed some interesting emotions that enable us to extract benefits that others have on offer. And a lot of that extraction occurs because it feels really good. It feels good to help people, right? It feels good to do people favors. And it's typically because you then become valuable to them. And oh my gosh, they're going to turn around and then do favors right back for you. And so, so in any case, so tears, yes, the tool of the lower leveraged. It's interesting just to kind of have a personal story with that, which is, having a young child and then they cry when they need something or they're lower leveraged. And so but it was striking when the tears started to turn to anger, and I was like, no, you're not more formidable. I was like, and so I was like, I don't think this is gonna work for me.
Yeah. Deb, is there a way to tell if somebody is, like, say they're crying in front of you, if they are crocodile tears or they're legitimate tears?
This is a really good question. And I did mention my narcissistic ex. So that was, and so that's typically what you do find in psychopaths, these crocodile tears. And let me ask the two of you, assuming the two of you are not psychopaths. And so
we hope not. Yeah.
So when you cry, do you put it on display for everyone? No. Well, what do you do when you're crying? You're like, oh my gosh, like
hide
just
it.
like let me stare into the sun. Let me do something to dry this tear. Like even when you're sitting next to someone in the movie theater, it's dark. You're like, don't drop, don't drop.
Yeah.
Yes.
I tend to think that one of the things that we do to, when it comes to tearing is we tend to protect that because we don't want to say, if something has made us upset because we are imagining, we're very empathic and we're putting ourselves in other people's shoes, it's like, don't mistake these tears for low leverage.
Right.
Yes. These aren't low leverage. But crocodile tears are, oh, look at these tears coming down my eyes. Look at how they're
putting a show on.
And they're on display, or really, it is, look at these tears. So I think those are the ways to kind of identify, not that I'm now giving the playbook, for those crafty narcissists and psychopaths, like, oh, I have to shield, pretend to shield. But it is really true. It's one of those natural things that people automatically do, I think, who are genuinely crying versus doing that. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I do think that does tend to be slightly different for crocodile tears, which are that which is not covered.
This might be a bit personal, so feel free to not answer this question, but you've mentioned your narcissistic ex a few times.
Sure.
And it's something I find interesting with people that study like what you study, or they may be a psychologist, or they have they're in this zone. And then they end up with a partner that has this trait that they probably should know. Why does that happen a lot?
So I would say, so I've listened to a lot of great podcasts where you have clinicians talking about this, and there's a lot of great people who are giving great information on this. And so if anyone finds themselves in one of these relationships, A, I'm sorry, but B, there's a lot of good resources out there. So back to your question of, yes, as an evolutionary psychologist, and people have said this, like, you would be one of the last people I would expect to get into one of these relationships.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that, so reasons are, there's several. So I think that people who find themselves in these relationships, so I guess let me just talk about myself. And I don't mind sharing, because I think a lot of people are in these relationships, and it is something that people don't like to talk about and it's a difficult spot to identify, and it's even harder to get yourself out of. So I was very hopeful. So that's one thing. And so I tended to believe in the better side, in the sense of like, I change, like I want to change, I want to be a better person, and my default is you must be similar to me, kind of thing. Oddly, I think that's the other way too, that he thought I was similar to him. And so it didn't work quite well. But the idea of, we all only know our own psychology. And when you meet someone, I think you bring that to the relationship, like, oh, these are the kinds of things I generally find and how I react to things. That must be kind of how you're set up too, from all I can infer. And so I think that's one of the things, to be sure. I think also it's important to learn how, what is a boundary, and how to protect them, without being afraid, right? So fear and obligation and guilt are often discussed as some of the main tools that people can use that rope you into some of these relationships. And when you are, listen, I'm not 18 anymore. So, you're older and you meet someone and you're like, oh my God, like it's, love bombing. It's like, it feels like love. And then, you're like, I'm older. What are the chances I'm going to find someone? And so that kind of changes the calculus. No longer, but recognizing some of the own personal pitfalls, I think could be one way that people can realize why they might have gotten into some of these relationships, being needy, being hopeful, and so forth. And ultimately, being very, very comfortable and happy with yourself is the key. But those are words, and it's really hard to, cultivate that. But sometimes it happens after a relationship like that. You're like, oh, yeah, I should have known that. So, yeah. So, live and learn. Hi, I'm brand new. But you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people, but the thing is that who do they target? I mean, they target people who are at the top of their game. I mean, it's an ego boost to them as well, right? So they target very successful individuals and people who are empathic and very kind and have resources to give and so forth. So and it's a manipulative type. It's a thing.
Debra, let's talk about disgust and the tie-in with a global pandemic like COVID. Why did behaviors like mask wearing or social distancing become moral signals, not just health choices?
So that's a great question. And they certainly did become moral signals, didn't they?
Yeah.
That badge wearing and most anything our mind uses to sort people into coalitions. And I think that we're looking at that. We're looking for that all of the time. So identifying what you might believe, who you might be allied with, what kinds of things I can or cannot say without getting in trouble. I think we're very sensitive to those things. So given any type of large events like that, you would tend to find people would very easily, to the extent there was a badge that was kind of forced on people or that became a custom, that is something that our mind would naturally use, I think, to the extent it helped categorize coalitions.
Because is it true that disgust was once used to protect us from disease? Can you talk us through that emotion from an evolutionary point of view?
So disgust is disgusting. Disgust is an interesting emotion. And so it seems to have evolved to regulate behavior in 3 different ways. So first, it governs consumption, so what we eat. It keeps us away from toxins, so plant toxins, which cause bitterness. And then also sourness, which is a detector for bacteria. And so it kind of, we have a nice kind of food psychology that generally tends to keep us away and steers us clear of things that can harm us and pushes us towards so there's, in the world of physics, there's entropy, right? There's things that can increase entropy and cause disruption in cellular and biological systems. Disgust keeps us away from entropy increasing things like bacteria that want to use our own resources and toxins that can kind of cause all neural disruption and so forth. And it pushes us towards things that are entropy reducing and growth enhancing and homeostasis. And so things like sugars and, fats and proteins and all these things that can help build and maintain. So our food psychology is, how do we know that something is bad for us? Disgust seems to be the emotion that evolved to keep us away from things that are, are contaminated. So that's one aspect of it. And likely other animals have disgust. So that's usually a big argument in the emotions literature, in the sense of, are emotions just humans? Emotions are just programs that take in information and coordinate, psychology and physiology in a particular way that led to, an outcome that was likely to increase survival and reproduction. So smelling something foul, or, seeing maggots crawl out of meat, those are things that would have been good cues that that's an unhealthy thing to eat. So, maggots in and of themselves aren't disgusting, right? So, but it's just that they're a timestamp for how long that meat has been exposed. And so,
absolutely.
And so that's one of the reasons. In any case, so that's one area of disgust. Another one is what to touch. And so we kind of stay away from, the gooey stuff. I did do a study. I was at the University of Hawaii for a stint, and I did a study having people put their hands into boxes. I played it as a Halloween game. And so I remember going into like this haunted house and putting my hand to a box, and they said, you're feeling eyeballs, but it was like the yolks, hard-boiled egg yolks in oil or something. And so it was really gross, because then it would mush it a little bit. And so, but I was just curious about, do we have a good tactile sense of disgust? And does that sense of disgust that comes from touch, does it correspond with the kinds of properties that would have correlated with bacterial presence? So bacteria thrive in warm and wet places. And so do people find wet stimuli more disgusting than dry, warm more disgusting than cold, and so forth? And they do go, so it's kind of like obvious, but so there you go. So I ran another Halloween study in my lab. So touch and contact is another domain of disgust. And the last one we already mentioned, which is sexual disgust. So mate choice. So not only do we have a very complex mate choice system that guides and gears us towards attributes and features that would have been diagnostic of a mate that would have led to the production of healthy offspring in the past. But we also have a system kind of steering us clear of individuals who did not. And so people who might have been less healthy, and certainly genetic relatives, too young, too old. So disgust is certainly an emotion that is important in the sexual realm as well. So those three areas of disgust are the ones that I think are important. But we also talked about morality. And I don't think that there's an actual proper domain of moral disgust. I think there's behaviors that morally disgust us, but that's because of the social value and how we socially index a variety of behaviors. So I think that moral disgust grows out of those other three domains.
Debra, we like to wrap up our episodes with our guests sharing an item that is important to them. Is there an item that you have that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I really, my hormonal patch that I wear to keep my brains from falling out my ears, that's a value to me. I have a little bluebird that a girlfriend gave me a very long time ago, and it just symbolizes good friendships. And so I have found that, especially going through some hard times, I've got some amazing friends and colleagues and mentors. And so they've been really valuable. So yes, so my bluebird.
Yeah, nice.
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
If someone's made it to this point of the episode, they've loved every single word that you had to say. Is there something that you want to say to that person that's been watching this entire time?
Is there something I would like to say? I think that, well, first, thank you for listening. But also, let's see. I think I'd like to end on a note of gratitude, that I think that there's a lot to be grateful for. So we started with moral outrage. We've gone to, we went to, incest and disgust and those kinds of things, and narcissism and psychopathy and crocodile tears and those kinds of things. But one of my most favorite emotions is gratitude. I think that it's really true. It can pick you up when you're down, by thinking about all the things that we have that we can be grateful for. But it is really important in terms of forging and cementing and maintaining really good friendships. So,
Debra, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Deb.
thank you.